Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is part 2 of the video, the install. So last video I took everything off, and then after I stopped filming, I spent about an hour cleaning the surfaces on what the new intake manifold is going to go on. Just to show you guys where I'm at right now. So my surfaces are super smooth and clean. I used a little bit of like dish soap and a damp paper towel to kind of finish off cleaning off the surfaces. These are the new gaskets that came with my kit. The big thing about these is they are a little bit taller, so if you look at them you can see that the screws aren't fully lined up. So if you see on this side, what I ended up doing is I pulled off the valve covers so this thing's gonna fit, and then when I put the valve covers back on, they'll just kind of force their way in place, and the cardboard will kind of get out of the way when I do that. It shouldn't take very much to get it in place, and it won't damage anything once the intake manifold's on, because it'll be basically protecting it. So it's 4 bolts to pull these things off. I was thinking about painting them black anyways, just so they would match the new air intake that I got. So I'll pull those off. I'll clean them off really well, and then I'll probably put a couple coats of paint on them, just so they kind of match everything else that's going on underneath. So the next step is going to be to get a little RTV. I had some come with the kit. After I pull this guy off, I'm going to make sure the surfaces are nice and smooth, put a little RTV in the corners, and then come across this spot right here, and then the same thing on the front, RTV across here. A lot of companies are getting away from even providing plastic gaskets to go right here because they just tend to leak. So I'll put a little RTV probably on each of the screw holes just to hold it in place, and then once I get all the RTV and everything in place, we'll come back to the video. Okay guys, if it seems like my film is a little out of order at points, that's because I am currently reshooting sealing the intake manifold. At the end of this video you'll see I call it good and done. Shortly afterwards I was checking to make sure the radiator fluid was burped properly, and while it was sitting in my driveway I noticed that a lot of oil was coming out the back. So I knew immediately what it was. When I originally put in the gaskets onto these 2 edges right here, I didn't put enough. I read the tube, which the tube had nothing to do with building that gasket, and so I made a mistake, which ended up causing me to have to do this portion all over again. But this time, you get to learn through my mistake. Make sure you put a lot of RTV on these 2 surfaces. So right now, I'm gonna pull the magazine out of my block. I'll put this in here just so no debris or dust or anything got inside my engine block while it sat overnight. Right now, I've got the gaskets from on the side still on from when I put it on before. So you're gonna see it kind of edited back and forth between the 2. So the instructions on here recommends trying to get everything set within 5 minutes. So I'm not too worried about these spots right here. Really, what I'm just putting these on here so when I go to put the gasket on, it'll hold on to something. So I'm just doing a really thin layer of gasket goo around all the holes, and that's gonna give the non-silicone side of the gasket something to hold on to. So this doesn't have to be super thick. This is really just kind of a little extra. It'll help hold it on when I put it on, and then it'll help with the sealing process. Alright, so here's the gasket. As you can see, it's got a silicone side that goes up. This right here is it's for the exhaust, and it's an exhaust limiter. Edelbrock recommends putting it in when you live in a hot environment. I'm in Arizona, so it doesn't really get much hotter than here, so I'm definitely going to keep them installed. So that's that. So I'm going to go ahead and just set this into place. It should hold on quite nicely. Make sure you get the corners with just a little dab, and then once you've got both sides on, then once you got both sides on, you can go ahead and do a bead on the front and back. And now to put the RTV seal on these two edges. Now the big thing is you want to pretty much cover this entire surface, and you want to start right in these corners. So start right at the top of the corner and just put a nice big bead of RTV. Okay, so this one's much bigger than what I did last time, and I'm gonna go ahead and just overdo it this time. So it's gonna push a lot out, and that's fine, but I don't want to have to do this again. So I'm going to put more, and that's what GM calls for. They recommend that you do this versus use a plastic gasket. So that's what we're doing. Okay, and since I've had to pull this off and back on, I'm going to just go ahead and put a little extra around my water ports. It's got a little silicone bead going around it, but I'm just going to do a little extra because I don't want any of that water to leak into my exhaust or my fuel line. So, not too much because you don't want it to go all over the place, and I'm going to just kind of keep it right on the outside edge of the little silicone bead it's already got on it. But you don't need to worry about putting it around any of the exhaust ports. Just gonna put it and the reason you don't really want to get any around the exhaust ports, at least you don't want to put a big bead or anything like that, because if any gets into these exhaust ports, it's gonna have an issue on performance. So just a really light. There's all I'm doing right now. This stuff is setting up right now. It takes only about 5 minutes for it to set up, so you want to get it on in that time period. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and just put my pressure sensor back in, because as this thing comes out, it's going to squish a bunch of RTV into that area, and I don't want to have to dig out the RTV from the oil pressure sensor hole. This is going back in. So just gonna get that started. After I get the intake manifold in, I'll go ahead and get it tightened down. But for right now, I just want to block the hole so as I put it in. So it ready to go now. Yeah, a lot more RTV this time around. Should be more than enough. Okay, that's in. So putting the bolts back in. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit of thread locker on each one as I put it in. Okay, when I come back, I'll have all the bolts in with thread locker, and then we'll talk about tightening them down. So here is the tightening order on our intake manifold. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So like that. That's what we're looking at. We want to torque this intake down to 30 foot-pounds. So the first thing we'll want to do, set our torque wrench. We're gonna just go to 2/3 that to get everything down. We'll get everything down to 20 foot-pounds, and then after we get everything down to 20 foot-pounds, we'll go back through one more time. And we'll get everything down to 30 foot-pounds. So unfortunately, I don't have any way to get into here with my torque wrench, so my insides, I'm gonna have to use my torque wrist and get these down to what I think is about 20 foot-pounds, and then 30 foot-pounds on the inside ones. So it's my number 1. Number 2, number 3, number 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7. It seems to be torquing down. Let me swap that one out for a slightly longer, bigger bolt. I don't know why it's not torquing down. Eight. Nine. 10. 11. 12. Alright, and then I'm going to do that all over again one more time. I'm going to go a little bit harder on the middle ones with the torque wrist, and then do them all one more time down to 30. I'm going to pull this one out because it doesn't want to torque down. I'm going to get a slightly longer bolt. And then now this is going to look weird because it's going to jump to a completely unmounted carburetor and a whole bunch of other stuff. So that's why that's happening. I will see you guys now back to installing the rest of everything on here that you already see. I went ahead and threw the vacuum back onto this, and other than that, I'm probably not going to do too much more. I'm going to let it sit for an hour, and then after it's sat for an hour, I'll probably come back in and start putting additional parts back into the intake manifold at that point. So I will see you in a little bit. Alright guys, we're back. It's been a day. Everything's been setting. I've got the valve covers just sitting there to protect the valves. At this point I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the distributor and the distributor cap. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little O-ring and some RTV and just put a really light film on the top just to kind of hold it in place. It doesn't need much, maybe just a fingertip's worth, and then you're just going to spread a real nice even light layer. It doesn't have to be much all the way around this thing, and then you're going to put this in place on the intake manifold, and then you're going to take your distributor and put it back on. So again, I didn't put very much on, just a light amount, and then just put it right in place, right on the hole. It's not going to go anywhere. And then if you watched my last video, I warned you the importance of making sure you don't let this thing spin. You make sure it goes right back on where it came off, and I am doing just that. That's why I've got tape on it, and you want to make sure it gets on there exactly how it was. Should be good. Let me just make sure. Yeah, that's good. So it's got a line on the bottom of it, so it really can only go one way or the other way. So I've got this facing the firewall, I've got that facing this way, and that's what I diagrammed out in my notebook. And I'll just remove this blue tape because it's not going anywhere. Get the bracket on. Alright, so really not much left to do with this part of it. You want to make sure you can tighten this down a little bit, but it's not really a big deal. The gasket there should hold in place after you've done it all. The RTV is really not 100% necessary, and honestly, it's probably not going to make a huge difference. It'll hold it onto the top more so than it does the bottom, because the bottom it's actually going to probably twist when you're setting up your vacuum, your timing. So at this point I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the distributor cap. Again, super important you put it back on where it was when it came off. So not a whole lot of ways you can put this on wrong, but you just want to get it back on. I'm probably not going to put my plugs on right now. I'll hold off on doing that, but I will reattach these, and I'll probably tighten this down just a little bit more so it's not moving around so much. And then we'll start putting our carburetor back on. Alright, we're getting to the point where we can now install our carburetor. I've put in 3 of the 4 studs that go into the intake manifold. So the core side goes down, so make sure you don't screw that up. And they're very easy to put in. They're finger tight, and it shouldn't take much, and you don't have to really worry about using any kind of lock or anything to hold it in place. The pressure from the nuts should hold them in place, so don't worry about doing that. And for this gasket, there's no requirement to put any kind of sealant down when you install it, so don't worry about that either. Okay, so we're ready to put our carburetor in. So make sure you put the front forward. It's got the smaller hose on it in the front, and then the 2 screws for adjusting how lean it is. Alright, and it goes right on. And there she is. So 4 bolts or 4 nuts to get this guy down. Each nut's got a lock washer with it, so make sure you put those on. Alright, now we can tighten down the nuts. Edelbrock recommends doing a cross pattern tightening. They use a 1/2 inch. It does not barely fit my socket on the back ones. It's pretty tight, so they just use 1/2 inch. So just use a crescent wrench to tighten down the back ones. Again, it says hand tight, so you don't need to worry about getting out a torque wrench or anything like that. But just be cautious. You do not want to over tighten these. You could damage the carburetor. You could damage the intake manifold. So do not over tighten. This thing's not really sealing too much. You don't have to worry about liquids coming out of this seal right here. So I would not over tighten this guy. Sweet. Alright, the carburetor's in place. Nuts are on. I've still got to get my water outlet to the heater core on here. And then looks like it's got a couple extra holes that I'm going to have to block. Hopefully it came with those, otherwise I'm going to have to go to the store. And then start working on getting the linkages hooked up. Sweet. I forgot to mention you need to hook this wire back up, and any other wires that you remove from this guy. And a flathead works best for getting these back on. And they just twist right back into place. Okay, and this one's going to my battery, so just make sure you hook it up to the right one. The left one's to your tachometer, the right one's to the battery, and this is going into the here to provide the power to it. So make sure you just get the right correct sides hooked up when doing that. All right, so next I've got a bracket. The ones that were in the Jeep before were super modified to try and make work. They definitely were not going to work for my purposes. So I got this bracket. This gives me the 3 holes, one for the spring, one for the throttle cable, and one for the transmission kickdown cable. So those should all fit in there. Looks like it's kind of tight on the valve covers, so it's going to be kind of tight squeeze. I may have to bend it up just a little bit. Shouldn't be that big of a deal. And just a reminder, the bolts on the block holding it in place are 7/16. So when we come back, I'll have this all tight down where I want it to be. Alright, I've got the bracket in place. I haven't tightened anything down yet, but the 2 bolts that are holding it to the intake manifold, I pushed on this just a little bit to give it a little extra room in between the valve cover and the bracket. I went ahead and pulled the TV cable through. It's in place now, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten these down to where it's as far forward as it can go, because I still got to adjust this up a little bit, and I've got plenty of room to do it with the cable that it came with, so it's a good thing I didn't cut that on my previous application. So I'll just be able to slide this forward and get it on there pretty good. So that's what I'm going to do next, is just get this all tightened down in place so it's not moving around. So when you come back, I'll have this adjusted forward. So I've got this one screw. I've got a little kit that I purchased to add a spot for it to hook up on here. I'll show you that right now. That's this guy right here. It's just going to go in place down here so it can hook up, and then yeah, so when I come back, this will be in place. That'll be adjusted to here, and then these will be tightened down, and then we'll start working on the throttle. Alright, so the TV cable right here just needs to be adjusted. I've got it on, so this is a little bit loose right now, and really what you want to be able to do, so you see how much play it's got. Ideally that's going to be the full play of your throttle. So you kind of want to, when you get it on here, you don't want it loose at all to start, but you also don't want to give up too much of your slack. So it should just be a little bit tight. So it wants to come out and then come back a little, because there's a little bit of, you just want just a pinch of tension. And that starts kind of the process of that kickdown cable. Just a light amount of tension. And then just tighten this guy down. Now, it should cover the full range. It shouldn't have really any extra. So, when I get all the way out, it shouldn't really have any extra, which I don't. So that's good. Just make sure this guy's nice and tight before you move on. Alright, so that's done. Next up, we need to get the throttle cable attached to this guy right here. It's got to come through the firewall. Now, in my last video, I did not remove the cable. I ended up doing it afterwards, so it comes out of the wall right here. The one that I originally had was really long, came all the way out, curved back, and actually grabbed onto the bottom so it could pull it the wrong direction. We want it pulling it this way, so it's going to attach to this hole right here. And then so I need to run it through here. It's going to kind of make a little bit of an S, and then come back through here. So in order to accomplish that, I can't use the original. What I did end up getting is a fully adjustable throttle cable. So I'll show you how this thing works. So what originally is on almost all old throttles is this little bracket right here. It's going to go inside. I'll show you where it hooks up. But so when you're taking it apart, this little guy squeezes together. When you squeeze this, you'll pop this out, and then you can lift the cable out of the throttle. This is going to go through your firewall, so you're going to have a washer on either side of the firewall. Nut, washer, firewall, washer, and then this side. The braid, so as you can see, it's just been cut down to a length. I'm going to have to change that length, so I'm going to probably end up cutting it once it's on. So before I get anything in place, I'm gonna have to measure everything to make sure it's good to go, and then I can pull this all off, cut this guy, and then throw some tape back on it, and then be good to go. The next thing is the plastic bracket. This piece goes in right here. And then once I get this in, I have a little bit of adjustment here. And then I've got this guy right here. And again, this is all adjustable, so I can change the length. And it'll go through the hole right here and attach. And that's going to be what pulls. So it should be much better than trying to use the original like the previous owners did. Alright guys, not a whole lot of room in here, so I'm going to do my best to show you what I'm doing. So I've got my universal cable. I've basically pulled all of the wire out, push it through the hole in the firewall, and then there's a hole in the top of the throttle. Just push it all through. And then what you want to make sure you have on this side of your universal cable, you want to make sure you've got your nut and your washer, and then you'll put that on the back side of your throttle cable, and then this little guy is going to push, should just push right into your throttle. Alright, so that's in there. So the nut and washer stay on this side. The cable just goes through here, and that's how it holds in place on your throttle. And surprisingly, these universal cables go on all sorts of vehicles. So this is just going to sit for now until we figure out the actual lengths that we need going into our cable. Alright, so my throttle cable's coming out, and then this is what I'll be feeding it through eventually. And then really what I just want to do is make sure I have got enough cable. So cable's what I'm going to be cutting last, so and I'll be cutting that right here. But what I need to figure out now is the length of the cover that's going to be going on it. So I need to figure out the length of this guy. So that's going to go on there like that, and then it's going to go to this guy like that. So what I want to do is make sure I get enough of it to where it's flexible enough. And it doesn't really kink, because we don't want any kinks. So that should be good. So I'm going to mark it right here, and then what I'm going to do after I mark it is I'm going to cut it with a Dremel cutoff wheel. So that should be the right spot. That gives me my S. So I'll cut that down to size, and then we'll slide it over our cable. Alright, so I've got this cutoff wheel, and I'm going to attempt to cut this without getting injured or ruining anything. So here goes. Alright, so that's all cut off, and looks pretty good. So I'll remove the tape, throw a little electrical tape on the end, just like they did from the manufacturer, and we'll call this good. Okay, so got my cut wire, threw some electrical tape on it, and I've got my braided wire. I'm going to run it on that. So get this going through. And then it's going to just push into the firewall. And the next piece to go on is the bracket that actually hooks into the bracket over there. So this goes on like this. It'll go over the electrical tape. Alright, I may put on too much electrical tape, so I'm going to take a little bit off. Actually, before I try and get that tip on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get this through, and I'm going to attach the nut onto that, and then I'll try and get that headpiece on. So I'm going to skip videoing that. Angles are awful anyways, so in just a second this should be tightened down. Alright, so this guy's in. I was able to get the black piece on by removing the tape and then just shoving the braided forward, so it was kind of bent inward. So now I've got this in place. I'm going to go ahead and slide this on and then push this into place. Alright, so that's on the bracket. I've got a little room to move the bracket forward and backwards, so I'm probably just going to put it right there. Get these tightened down. Alright, when I come back, I'm going to have my bracket tightened, and then we're going to work on getting the cable onto the carburetor. Alright, we've just got 2 more pieces to go on this guy before we can connect it to the carburetor. The first piece is this guy right here, and this is it's got a little Allen wrench hole on it. It comes with it to basically figure out the distance that you need it from the carburetor. What you want to make sure is that your throttle is not in any kind of, you want it in its up position. So before you do this, get inside your vehicle and just double check, make sure that you don't have any extra pulled or too much pushed in. You want it right where it wants to be sitting. Should be right here. I'm gonna go in and look real quick, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so actually now that I'm thinking about it, having it pulled forward just a little bit is not a big deal, because when you have this all the way out, that's your pedal all the way up. So with it being all the way up, it'll give you the most range of motion for your pedal. So right now my pedal's all the way up, and then as as I push on it, it should pull it forward. So I want this pretty much in the up position. So then I've got this guy right here. I'm gonna get that on there in just a second. But before I do that, what I want to do is, you've got this last little piece that goes on here like this, and it screws into this guy. So at this point, this is the point of no return as far as cutting your cable. Cut it too short and you don't have a whole lot of extra room to play with it. If you cut it too long, not a big deal, you can fix that, but I want to make sure it's where I want it. I'm going to probably double check it 2 or 3 more times before I cut it. And then, when I come back, I'll cut it. Alright, so I've double checked the position like 4 times now. I'm going to go ahead and cut it now with my wire cutters. I'm going to leave about 1/4 of an inch sticking out, and that should give me a little bit of play if for some reason I need to move it. Alright, might be some time for some new wire cutters. But that is cut. The Allen wrench hole is tight. So this is all the way tight. We can now put the last piece on. This guy right here. And we'll just screw this in place. So almost got all the way down, and then I've got this little nut that should keep it in place. And then that's right where I want it. So it's tight. Now I just got to get the little nut on the back end of this guy. Move this pin real quick so I can take this off and actually tighten it. And by the way, this is a 10mm and an 8mm. Alright, nice and tight. Slip this guy back on. Throw the pin back in. It's not going anywhere. The last thing I need to hook up, so this is all done, is the spring. I found out that I don't have the right hookup for my spring yet. I need to get something to connect on this side. The piece that I have is going to be too short, so I need to get something that'll hook to the front bolts of the intake manifold. But I can show you right now, just by hooking it up to this hole, how that's going to look. Alright guys, finally back. I know it's only been a few seconds for you, but for me it's been a few hours, a few frustrating ones at that. So my previous setup didn't have a bracket for a spring. And I tried a few different methods to try and make it work, and none of them were really giving me what I wanted. So after a few hours of that, I went ahead and decided to just make my own. I had a sheet of aluminum, I had a cutoff wheel, and I had a drill bit, and I just made some holes, bent it with a hammer and a vise, and that's what I ended up doing for the spring, and now it does exactly what I wanted. I'm going to push on the gas pedal. It's got really nice movement, and it's not running into anything. So cool. So now we can start putting more stuff on the engine. The next thing I was going to start hooking up to the carburetor is some vacuum lines. and I'm going to also hook up the breather to the valve cover. So what this guy does, and I'm going to tell you right now, this is not necessary. I think the carburetor even comes with a plug to fill that hole in the back. But what this is going to do is once you get everything hooked up, this hose runs into this guy, and then this hooks in to your oil filter or your valve cover. And what that's going to do is it's going to pull, it's going to provide a little vacuum for your oil, and it will pull some fumes back into the carb and burn it off, and that's actually better for the environment, I guess. So not necessary, but easy enough to pull off the old one and put on the new one, so I went ahead and did it. In order to get it on though, I did have to move this guy quarter turn to make it fit. So now that I've got it on, I'm going to go ahead and shift it back. And then that guy, you need to run this hose right here. And if you watched my removal, this is just part of the vacuum system. So I just got to get this guy back on here. Just a little bit more. See if I can make this fit. If I can't make this fit, then I might just pull the breather off, but I think I'm good to go. So I need to hook that up, and then I need to hook other vacuum lines into the block. You want to make sure everything's kind of got some sort of vacuum if it had it before. You don't want to miss anything. That goes to my distributor, and I just plugged it into the front of the carburetor. There's two other vacuum ports. I'm gonna have to double check to see if there's anything I need to hook into those. So I'll be back in a minute after I figure that out. But yeah, anything I unhooked, I'm gonna go ahead and hook back up into this guy. Quick little search. I don't need the rest of these vacuums, so I'm gonna go ahead and just block them off with vacuum caps. The carburetor itself came with a few, so I'm going to use those. I think I'm going to have to find one for the big one. Yeah, I'm gonna have to get one for the big one, and I think I'm also gonna have to. There's multiple open ports on this guy. There's one here, one here, one here, and all of them also provide some form of vacuum. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna have to get little plugs to cover those. Yeah, pretty much anywhere there's a hole that ends up not getting filled, you gotta plug it with something. So I will have to get plugs for all of those. You can use some kind of bolt. They do have specific plugs for them. I did buy a pack of plugs. I think it came with one at that size, so I'm gonna have to get at least 3 more. finish that off. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten down the rest of the vacuums, and then the next thing we're going to work on is the water outlet port and the heater core outlet. So I'll get those done next. So I did pull the other one off, as you saw in the removal video. I said I was going to try and salvage it, but I just went ahead and bought one of these. It was $6 and looks a lot nicer. And so that's going to go right here. Before I install anything for water, I typically wrap it in Teflon or plumber's tape. Either name works. Teflon tape, plumber's tape. And so the thing with this is you want to make sure you have it go in the correct direction. If you put it on the wrong way, then it'll just pull it off as you're pulling it off. So the trick is to just make sure you go the correct direction. Otherwise, like I said, it'll just strip it off. And I always have to double check myself, but I think I got it right the first time. I did. It's always exciting. Alright, so make sure you get on the thread nice and straight. And this guy's got a 7/8. You can use a socket if you've got a deep socket, but with the water outlet out of the way, this is easy enough. So. Alright, that ain't going anywhere. Alright, next we're installing the water pump. They do sell gaskets for these, but I've heard nothing but bad things about them. So I do what everyone else recommends, and that's just make a gasket out of RTV. So I've just got some ultra black maximum oil resistant RGB silicone gasket maker, and what I'm going to do with this is make about a 1/4 inch size bead. You want it to be as consistent as possible all the way around, and then just pick a spot to start. You do it in one go, that's awesome. I'm not doing great. But this is pretty good for the size. So alright. Just clean up that spot that I wouldn't just touch RTV with your bare fingers. And then I go ahead and throw some around where the bolts are going to go to, just to finish the seal. This bead doesn't need to be as big, but you do want it there. Sweet. So that's my gasket for the water outlet. Let that sit for a second. So I'm going to get it lined up. Use the bolts to line it up. And just set it straight down on top. Don't want to move it around too much. If you're reusing your previous water outlet from the other one, then make sure you clean it off really well. As I said with the intake manifold, the big thing with that is I always run a razor blade across the entire surface to make sure there's nothing big on there, and then I go over it usually with some kind of soap or some kind of cleaner. Just make sure there's no grime or oil or anything left behind. At this point, I'm probably not gonna make it too tight. At this point, I'm not gonna make it too tight. Probably gonna go just a little bit past where it starts to provide a little fight. And then one of the last things I'll do after everything's set for a day is I'll go through and I'll check everything one more time, all the bolts, to make sure everything's tight before I go and call it good. So that's it for the water outlet. I'll get the hoses reattached here in a second. Okay, and I am by no means perfect at this. I just realized I did something really stupid. So you probably won't get to see any of this. Actually, you probably will. Really dumb right now. I forgot to put my thermostat back in. So don't be me. Remember to put your thermostat back in before you do this. I will probably put a disclaimer. Hopefully this isn't too messy. Hopefully I can salvage the bead I've got in here. Looks pretty good though. Fortunately, this is 2 bolts and some gasket goo, so when all said and done and I check this later, if it is leaking, I'll just pull it off and do it again. Hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully I caught it early enough. And it hasn't set yet. Hopefully I don't get any air pockets in this guy. I'll probably go a pinch tighter than I did last time. Probably my only saving grace. Alright, yeah, so if you did forget your temperature thermostat like I just did, either start from scratch, just wipe everything off, or you can attempt what I just attempted and go for broke and hope that it didn't. Hope it still works. Alright, so we pull these guys off, and like I mentioned before, I have another pair that I wanted to try out. I paint them black. So they should be done drying. I'm going to show you a little trick for your valve covers. Just before putting the I use a cork gasket. I've never had any issues with a cork gasket, so that's my preferred method. So for this guy, you don't need RTV. What I like to do is just leave a really thin layer on here, and what that's gonna do is it's gonna stick to the gasket, and then you basically are just gluing it to your gasket, so when it's time to put it on, it doesn't go anywhere. Alright, and then you just get that on there. And then let that sit. And when it's time to put this guy on, it'll be nice and stuck in place. Just line it up to your holes. You don't want to go to put it on and then they don't want to come off. So I'll do that to both of them. Okay, so now we're going to put on the valve covers. This new bracket does seem to get in the way a little bit. Just gonna get it out of the way. Don't want too much to be felt off. So well, looks like that's gonna be what we're gonna have to do anyways. So make sure you line your hole up on the front, and so this guy right here can go into this. There's a little plastic piece that goes in it. I'll throw that in there after I get the bolts in. So these guys right here are designed to spread the pressure further around. Very useful. Alright, and when I come back I'll have both valve covers on. Both valve covers are on now. I've got the PVC pipe coming off from the valve cover to the back of the carburetor, and then I've just got a Edelbrock pressure relief on the other one. So this is a pretty standard configuration. The next thing I need to do is I've got these two plugs. I'm going to go ahead and wrap them in some Teflon tape and then put those in. Now I'm going to put on my water outlet hose going to the radiator. I want to make sure these hose clamps are pretty tight, because if they're not, you'll find a nice leak shortly after you turn your vehicle on. So all I've got left to do at this point is I've got a handful of holes still on my intake manifold. So I've got one here, I've got one here, two in the middle, and then two in the back. The two in the back look like they're going to be pretty tough to get to. I'm hoping that I can just throw some kind of plug into them. So I'm going to have to do a little research on those. But outside of that, pretty much everything's back on except for my spark plug wires. And I'm going to hold off on that because if I can't get this back one in, I'm going to have to pull this whole thing out again. So yeah, so I'm going to hold off on putting those back on until I figure that out. After some digging, I found out that I cannot find any information on these online Fortunately though, I was able to get a good angle on all of them. I checked all of them, and none of them go anywhere, so they're all just mounting holes. So if you're struggling to find that information online, that's the information. They're all just designed for mounting for newer engines. So I don't need to use any of them, and I don't need to plug any of them because there's no reason to. So if you notice, everything's pretty much on now. I've just got the distributor cap needs to be tightened down, but I won't do that till after I start, and then I just got to get all my plugs back on. If you noticed from the last shot, all my hoses are a little bit shinier now. I just ran some, it's called Black Magic, and it's just helps rubber look a little bit shinier, cleaner. So I did that just so the overall finish looks gonna look a little bit better. Not that it really matters because it's a Jeep and it goes in the mud, so it's gonna stay clean for all of a day or two. So I'm gonna go ahead and hook up the plugs, and then we'll move on from there. And the water outlet is gonna be 20 foot-pounds. 20 foot-pounds is not that much. Hopefully, before you removed, you took down your firing order. Mine is 184-36572, and then mine starts here on this post, so this one should go to my number 1 spark plug. So I'm gonna just go ahead and hook up my spark plugs. The goal of spark plugs is you kind of want to get them as clean looking as possible during the install. It's definitely a little bit of art to it. The cleaner you can make the install, the better. You want to make sure you hear that little pop sound when you connect them to the spark plugs. So that's my number 1. I'm going to go ahead and hook them up. I'm going to do this in fast motion for you, and then I'll get the other side all hooked up. Alright, all my plugs are a little bit on the loose side, so I'm just going to take a pliers and just give them a little squeeze, just so they're a little bit tighter. Alright, I don't know about you guys, but if you're anything like me, spend half your job looking for a tool that you used 5 minutes ago. So did finally find a pair of pliers, not the ones I was looking for, but just kind of go to the top area. You can see the metal inside there while you're doing it, and just give it a little squeeze. That'll help with actually sitting down. You just kind of give a little tug on each one. If it comes off real easily, then you should probably redo it. So I had to do 2 of them. Of the 8, that's not bad. All the rest of them seem to hold on pretty good. So spark plugs are back on. Fuel's connected. Everything's reattached. Just kind of at this point you want to go through your did I do everything. So all my hoses are plugged. Here we go. This guy needs to be tightened. So always do a final check on everything. As you're watching the video, you may have caught that earlier that I forgot to tighten this guy. Thanks for not telling me. I remembered, so got that done. Again, it's kind of just a final check before you want to do anything. Trying to turn it on. Alright, that's nice and tight, and since I didn't tighten that one, I'm assuming I also didn't tighten the front one, so tightening that one down. So again, you're just kind of doing a step-by-step. What have I hooked up? What haven't I hooked up? What have I tightened? What haven't I double-check tightened? So I just kind of do a double-check on everything before I do anything at the end. Alright, the hoses are on nice and tight. And I think the last thing I have to do before I need to attempt to start this thing. I never disconnected the battery. A lot of guys recommend unhooking the negative. I don't really have anything hooked up because this is all manual. It's never a bad idea to unhook the battery, but I rarely do. I haven't heard anything yet, so take it or leave it. The last thing I have to do though before I try and start this guy is put my radiator fluid back in. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we've got the radiator fluid. We're going to go ahead and just put that back in. Like I said, my fluid's not that old. It's still fairly clean. Alright, I've got just a smidge left. It filled right up to the top. It's got to go fill some gaps in the rest of this thing. And you should hear it kind of working its way around. And then the last little bit in there. So I did lose a little bit when I was pulling off the intake manifold. So I will have to add a little bit later. Not a whole lot, so I always recommend having a little bit of coolant on hand when doing a project like this. Personally, I use whatever's cheapest at the time, so I've got Prestone, Concentrate, and then what I'll do is I'll take 2 bottles, basically keep the old one, take a new one, split the total into 2 separate ones, and then just do an even 50-50 blend. So with that being in there, we should be good to start our engine and start tuning. And I didn't mention it earlier, the valve covers actually only get torqued down to 3 foot-pounds, so that's really not that much. My torque wrench doesn't even go that low. So pretty much the tightness that I've got on it already is going to be good. I might check it one more time after doing the engine warm-up. So if all goes to plan, this thing should start after a few attempts once it gets fuel up into the carburetor. Moment of truth. Okay, so it wasn't as bad as I thought. My distributor was just way too far forward, so I've got it spun back now, and it's starting now. Now it comes down to just the whole tuning aspect of it. My idle is too far out, so I'm adjusting that in. Hopefully it'll start this time and stay on. And we'll just go from there. Guys, so a little bit of tuning on the distributor cap, and now it's sounding pretty good. It's up to temperature, everything sounds good. I did spot one leak coming from the front port right there, so I'm going to go ahead and shut it off, and I'm going to put more Teflon tape on that guy, and then put it back in, and then take it out for a test drive. That's exactly what we want it to sound like when it shuts off. That means it's not running too rich. So really happy with how this project turned out. So the big thing on tuning the carburetor, there's a few things you can do. So you've got a few screws. You got this screw here, and then this screw here. This one's going to change your idle. So all this one's doing is it's pushing out your how far in your throttle's going. So as if you were stepping on the gas a little bit more, and all that's doing is just pushing the gas pedal down a smidge. These two are changing how rich each side of your carburetor is. Push it all the way in, it's going to be at its leanest. Pull it all the way out, it's going to be at its richest. So what you might want to do if you want it to run real lean is just push it all the way until it sounds like it's losing gas, and then just bring it out 1.5 turns, and that'll keep it nice and lean. There are a ton of other things that you can do to these carburetors. I am no expert in it, but there are springs and all sorts of ports and jets that you can adjust out. These things come out of the box ready to go, so it shouldn't require too much adjusting. So this is going to conclude this video. If you like what I'm doing here, please give me a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe. If you want notifications when my videos come out, hit the little bell button. Outside of that, thanks for coming and watching another video. I know this was a long one, but I appreciate you guys, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.